All right, it's time to talk about shooting B-roll. What is B-roll exactly? Well, if the main content, the main footage that you're going with is your A-roll, B-roll is going to be the supplemental or alternative footage intercut with your main shots. Okay, so we're going to take, let's say our A-roll or our main footage is going to be an interview. We've got this staged interview, we've got 3-point lighting set up, and we're really working hard to make sure that this is a very intentional interview. The B-roll is going to be all that other footage that is sort of like cut in with the interview. So maybe we'll cut away from the actual interview location. We'll keep using the audio, and we'll show some B-roll, some extra alternative footage that is reinforcing to some of the other things that is being talked about from our main footage. So what exactly is the purpose of B-roll? We're introducing variety into the video that we're creating. Let's keep going with the example of the very intentional sort of staged interview setup. It can sometimes feel a little stale if you're just going to be bouncing back and forth between two people, or maybe it's even just the interviewee is the one being featured. We don't actually see or hear from the interviewer. We just get the answers and the responses. That can be pretty flat and dry, regardless of how interesting the background is. So the B-roll is going to help us introduce some variety, build up some sort of engagement with our audience, and allow for us to make an immersive experience for people to watch. It also is useful in describing the environment that is necessary to the subject matter, right? So again, if we're in a controlled environment for the interview portion of our content, that main footage, well, maybe that B-roll is going to be used to sort of describe the environment and show us what that space looked like before the interview began. Maybe there's some footage of setting up. Maybe there's actually B-roll footage that describes the environment to which the interview is speaking about. It might be speaking on the endangered species out in the Alaskan wilderness. So our B-roll footage needs to describe that environment that's being talked about, even though the interview isn't actually taking place there. The other thing that B-roll does is support the subject matter. So not only are we going to describe the environment that is being discussed potentially, or give us some sort of clue as to what type of things we're dealing with, it's going to support the subject matter in the very specific things that are being talked about. We can capture B-roll footage that then will play back while those exact things are being talked about. So it's important to make sure that we grab all sorts of B-roll footage. We need to keep it relevant. It needs to do the things that we just talked about. It needs to provide variety. It needs to describe the environment. It needs to support the subject matter, but we need lots of it, and we need lots of options. So I'm talking multiple angles, different exposure levels, camera movements that are going to sweep us either in or out of some of these different locations, or showing us these particular things. Get creative with this part. So how do we actually use B-roll? Well, we collect sometimes what I would refer to as static B-roll, meaning that the camera itself isn't moving. It's just capturing something, some bit of secondary footage that we'll call B-roll that we can use to supplement our interview or the rest of our video. But the camera itself isn't really doing too much interesting things. It's just capturing what's available to us. So that can be good, again, in helping to establish an environment, give us some description of that, or capture something that's really busy and already happening. But we also could include some motion. Again, we're going for variety here. So we want to have a collection of static shots. We want a collection of motion shots. So we're saying maybe now we want to actually take the camera and pan from left and right so we can see all the different things that are happening in a particular space. Especially if there's a lot of variety in that space, then we can reveal different things as the camera pans or tilts or just moves through one of these spaces. And motion can include lots of different things, right? So we're talking about physical camera movements. The camera itself can be moved. We can actually pivot the camera from a tripod. We can also do things like zoom and focus pull or focus rack, right? So we have a depth of field and we are focusing on one particular item and leaving some other piece of our frame or our composition a little bit out of focus, and then switching between the two. That can be a really interesting way to reveal something that's happening through B-roll footage and to keep things really interesting and engaging. Again, B-roll footage is going to support the main footage and the main subject matter, but it's also going to be that even though it's secondary, it's still so crucial and important because it's the extra stuff that separates one video that's a boring interview from another that's an interview that is supported by lots of interesting and creative things that are helping tell a story and help your audience be more engaged with what you're creating. So there's a little bit about shooting B-roll. It's really useful. I recommend that you practice by just capturing as much as you can from different angles. Maybe you're not going to use most of it, but you'll have these options, and you're also going to be building up a library of your own B-roll content that can be useful in the future.